This is the Parenting IQ podcast where our mission is to equip you during your child's academic years to bring learning to the daily little moments. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Cagle, and I want to welcome you to Season 4, Little Moments, Big Impacts. I am so privileged to have Maya Corbin with me today, and here's why. As the founder of Wealthy Kids Investment Club and a popular Instagram account, Teach Kids Money, which is actually how I found her, her heart is to inspire parents to raise financially independent kids. You're going to hear more about her story throughout our chat, but just know that her vision is to empower every child to become a financially independent adult. And can I get an amen, parents? Maya, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to get started by having you tell us a little bit about your work that you do at Teach Kids Money and what led you to start that work in addition to being a CPA.
Yeah, so originally I started off my career as a CPA. I was an auditor and a tax accountant as well as a CFO. But when I was 32, my husband and I managed to pay off all of our debts. We had about $60,000 in debt, like student loans, car loans, and whatnot. And we also paid off our mortgage. And at that time, I just thought that I wanted to do something a little bit different, something with more purpose. And our children were very little at the time. And I realized that they didn't really know anything about money. And as a CPA, I also met a lot of clients of mine who were making really good income, but they could barely make their ends meet. And so I didn't really understand why that was, considering that, I came from a very poor background. I lived in government shelters and government housing. So I couldn't understand how people like that could not make ends meet. And then I realized that it really all stems from childhood because they were not taught about money when they were younger. So I started looking at the school curriculum and what my kids were going to learn about financial literacy. And I realized that this was some 11 years ago. And at the time, the schools were really not doing much when it comes to financial literacy. So I started teaching my own kids. And then soon I was doing workshops in schools for kids all the way from like kindergarten to grade 12. Then I was doing like workshops for parents in the evenings. And then when COVID happened, I started taking my business online, like a lot of us did, which was great because I was able to have more of a global presence and talk to a lot more parents worldwide. And I started my Wealthy Kids Investment Club. And eventually that led me to actually publishing a book recently on teaching kids how to invest. So it's been quite a journey. It's been a lot of fun. And I really enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting to point out you just very little bit just dropped a hint to us that the schools weren't really doing their job, if you will. And that's where you said, you know what, we parents need to step in. Right. And that's essentially what Parenting IQ is about. The mission of the podcast is to equip parents to bring learning to everyday moments, because you're right. Even when we send our kids off to school, because, we're homeschooling and our listeners know that. So we homeschool our children. We can kind of have a say. However, that's not the case for everybody. But as you mentioned, there are things that you can do to supplement, right? If you see a gap taking place, you can come and step in, right? And so with that, what you just mentioned about what you started with this global impact that you're able to have taking your business online. I know that you have your online presence on Instagram, but then what else do you do in addition to that? You just told us about a book, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the book is really exciting. And actually it was really my Instagram account that helped me realized that the book was much needed because when I started posting on Instagram, mostly during pandemic, I was posting helpful tips for parents, how to teach basics, like, how to teach kids difference between needs and wants and how to teach them to be smart spenders and budgeting. And while all that was really helpful. And I found that most parents are able to figure that out even on their own if they have to. What a lot of parents were struggling with was how to teach kids investing, because nobody ever taught them how to invest. And investing is one of these things. It's like a big elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. We all have to do it because it's really important, especially for our retirement and long-term planning. But nobody ever taught us how to do that. And then even if you hire people, how do you know you're hiring the right person? So I started to get a lot of questions around that. And I noticed that parents were very much intimidated by investing. And that's why I wrote this book. It's called From Piggy Banks to Stocks, The Ultimate Guide for a Young Investor. And it's really a book that I wrote for my younger self, because I wish that I had a resource like this when I was growing up, because it explains all these complex investment terms in a language that a 10-year-old can understand.
That's
so,
awesome.
it is a book for ages 10 and up, but it doesn't stop there, because when I was writing the book, at the same time, I had some testers that were testing the book. So it was parents and children that I knew, and they were going through the book and giving me some feedback. And what was really interesting, it wasn't just that the kids were excited about investing and, like they actually wanted to start investing because of what they were reading in the book. It was more the parents that were coming to me and said, "Thank you for writing this book. I finally feel less intimidated by investing. I understand the basics now. Like, I understand, when they talk about something on the news, it's like, I actually understand what it is that they're talking about." And to me, it just feels so good. Right.
Purposeful.
And I know that the book is, the right book. And, even on my Instagram account, like some people have already purchased the book and they would send me comments and they're like, "You know what? Thank you. Like, this is really, really great book. Like, I'm learning a lot. My kids are learning a lot."
That's amazing. Well, I'm going to be picking up the copy because actually been talking to my husband about that. Being a follower of your account for a couple of years now, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, it's very important. And I am from Brazil. We also were briefly talking about that. And being from a different country, you're right. There are certain things that that doesn't even have anything to do with it, but that we weren't taught. Wherever you're from, you weren't taught, and not because your parents didn't, want to do it. It just kind of was a realm of, hey, I don't know how to do it. And looking at life in America, you always hear the term diversify. You need to diversify your income, right? And so some ways that we can do that starts really young. Not only can we teach our kids financial literacy, but we can also put those things into practice right away. But before we get into that, you also just talked briefly about needs versus wants. And I think that that's one of the things that comes up quite a bit to me. And I talk about education. I do not talk about money, which is why I wanted to partner with you for this episode, because that is your forte, not mine. But, a lot of parents come to me and say, "Kelly, every time we walk into any store, doesn't matter where we go, my kid finds something that they want." And then it's this battle and it all, kind of spirals from that. But the needs versus wants, you also just threw in there about paying off your debt, $60,000 plus your mortgage. Well, that can't be done without really strong self-discipline, right?
Right.
So what process was that like? And what have you taught your own children, as you mentioned, about, hey, needs versus wants here, guys? Let's unpack that,
Yeah. So the thing about needs versus wants, this is literally the cornerstone of financial literacy. And this is something that I used to teach to kindergartens. They're capable of understanding that needs are things we need for survival. Wants are things we want to have, but we don't necessarily need them for survival. And they actually get that. And they get that we need to get needs first and then wants. The part that's difficult is the discipline. And this is what I noticed, that it's not just kids that lack the discipline. It's also the adults, right? So if we can practice this in childhood, it's going to become much easier in adulthood. And the way to practice that in childhood, and I strongly suggest for parents to give their kids allowance. Now, there's 4 different types of allowance. Okay. There's not just one way to do allowance. And there is no right or wrong way. I think you have to decide what works best for your family. The reason why I suggest allowance is because a lot of times people think of allowance as a gift, like somebody's giving you money. This is awesome. But allowance is not a gift. And I'd like to challenge everybody to think of allowance as a tool. It's a tool that teaches kids how to properly manage money. So when you give that allowance, it's not just like, oh, here you go, here's some money, see you later. They are things that you will require your child to do with that money. And also the idea behind the allowance is that, you're transferring the purchasing responsibility from you onto them. A lot of times some parents tell me I don't have money to give for the allowance. And that's the 4th. As I said, there are like 4 different types of allowance. We can discuss them in detail if you want.
Sure.
But one allowance method is like no allowance method at all. But I usually tell parents, every one of us, we all buy things for our kids. So instead of us purchasing these things, how about we just take that money that we have already spent or that we would have already spent, give it to our kids and be like, okay, now you're in charge. Do you want that candy? Do you want that toy? They start to think about it very, very differently because, when they're asking us to buy them toys or candy or whatever, they don't know what our budget is. They have no idea how much money we have in our bank account because that's not readily available to them. Like we don't share it with them, but they know when we give them allowance, they know exactly how much money they have for spending. And as long as we don't cave in, let's say they spend that money and they want more, as long as we don't cave in and we stand our ground and say, okay, now you've spent that. Now, you have to wait until you get next allowance, right? Or you have to find ways to like earn that money. Or maybe, if you have some money, but you don't have enough, like you can figure out ways how to negotiate to maybe get what you want for less money, which is something that we've done with our daughter at one of the fairs that we have here in the town that I live in. She wanted to get something from a street vendor and she didn't have enough money. She was begging us for money and we said no. And we said, well, you can negotiate. You can tell him, I don't have $5. I have $3. It was a ball that she wanted. Can I have that ball for $3? And she was scared to do it.
Yeah.
She said, can you guys talk to him instead of me? And we said, no, this is what you want. And she summoned her courage and she went and talked to the vendor and he gave her the ball for $3 instead of $5, right?
Awesome. So
there a lot of lessons can happen. Yeah. And one thing that you said at the very beginning, when we first started the podcast, you said that there are a lot of like real life experiences and real life lessons. And I think that's what teaching kids about money is all about. A lot of times parents are looking for these formal lessons. And I actually think we should be using everyday experiences to teach our kids about money.
Yeah. Yeah. That's 100%. Literally, it is the mission of what we do at Dr. Kelly Cagle because I agree, 100% agree with you. There's so many people, and even with learning, right? You think kids, for example, they think that learning only happens within the walls of a school. I have to physically walk into a school in order for me to learn. False. Parents think, oh, it takes a textbook for me to teach them something. False. It is in the everyday moments. For example, we have been focusing more on the financial literacy within our home. And I have a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 12-year-old. We went to our Federal Reserve Bank here. We toured how money was made. We did all these things. And then the activity that tied in with that was we all went to the bank and opened them checking accounts, and since then they got their little debit card in the mail. And now my baby, my 5-year-old is like, wait, I don't want to give them all my money to the teller. But because it just goes through this card. It doesn't make sense. I don't see my money any longer. So it's like, you can still bite-size this information that the first time we went to the bank, he only put like $6 in the bank. And then whenever he saw that his brothers were still able to use their card, to have access to the money, then next time we went, he put in the rest of his money into the bank. So it's the real life. It is the real life learning, that I feel like parents just need to take advantage of,
Yeah. And there are so many moments around us, I always tell parents, just think about what it is that you're doing. And a lot of times, like we would not even think about involving kids, maybe in certain conversations or certain experiences, because we have been conditioned to think, oh, they're just kids. They don't need to
Yeah.
know that. But
Yeah.
at some point, they will have to learn it. And you don't want to overwhelm them either. You need to keep it age appropriate. And as you said, those like bite size
Yeah.
educational pieces of information that you want to give them. So like, I know this is just another example. Like if I'm on like I try to like renegotiate my cell phone bill or maybe my insurance every year or every couple of years. And so when they were little, like I just, had them like, we would do like a road trip or something. And while we're traveling to our destination, I would call and they're in the car, they're listening to me negotiating and having this conversation. And I would just tell them, mommy's just trying to get a lower bill for the insurance, right? And now that they're older, I actually share a little bit more. So again, I don't want to
That's
overwhelm
good.
them. Like
Yeah.
they're teenagers. They're just
Yeah.
like, okay, but I tell them, this is me fighting for my money, and the money that I save, I can actually use that money for something else. So yes, it takes a little bit of extra time, but I could be on the phone talking to the guy while I'm cleaning or cooking or, multitasking. Like it doesn't take that much effort to negotiate these rates,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You're right. You're right. And even with what you said earlier about even kindergartners understand, and that's actually right. Part of a lot of curriculum in schools, the needs versus wants, when you kind of start understanding these different things. And I think that often we also forget that, for example, coffee, right? Whenever you are out and about, and you need a cup of coffee, do you really need that cup of coffee, or can you make the cup of coffee at home? And even the lessons that we teach by our actions, by our behaviors, our purchases. How fair is it for you to tell your kid, "Oh, I get a cup of coffee every day for $5," but you're wanting a treat today and you can't have, like, that doesn't even align, And so the needs versus wants, we have to constantly look at us, because they are learning by our actions, our behaviors as well, you
Yeah,
know?
we set the example, and I have a story about that because one mom that took one of my workshops, she said to me that when she was growing up, her parents were divorced, but her mom was a high level executive,
Mm.
and she said every morning, and she in particular, I think she just remembered the parts like when she was in high school. So every morning her mom would drive her to high school and they would stop on their way at a donut shop, and her mom would get breakfast for both of them and she would get coffee. And her mom never packed lunch. She would probably buy lunch at work. And anyways, so then when this lady grew up and she was in her 20s, she had her first job out of college, and she said she wasn't being paid that much. She remembers struggling with money and she just couldn't understand why. And she, for the very first time, took one of those financial literacy courses. And that's where they were looking at, they're like, oh, do you bring your lunches to work? Or do you buy lunches? Or do you, bring coffee to work in your like little thermos? Or do you buy it? And then she realized like she was buying her breakfast, buying her coffee, buying her lunch every day. And she said she didn't even realize that was a problem because she grew up in that environment. This is what her mom did, but her mom could afford it. Her mom made a lot of money and she was a single mom. And this was like, I guess maybe her way of being more efficient. And it worked for her, but it doesn't, like, I guess she never communicated to her daughter that this is not the normal way how most people live.
Yeah. And along the lines, going back to, and I don't know, I'm just going to speak for myself, but I grew up in Brazil, right? I was 11 when we moved to America. And in Brazil, the way that we grew up, my parents were really resourceful. My grandmother, in fact, whenever we took my boys to visit a few years ago, she saves scraps of everything. There's a purpose for everything. Okay. Like in the eggshells, there's a purpose for it. It goes into the compost because it turns into food for the chickens. The wraps, everything is recycled. There's a purpose for everything. Well, that's kind of how we grew up, right? Like you save the last drop of the mustard there, because it takes a while to earn. So you're going to be really mindful of every drop. Even the the bread butts, as my kids call it, the ends of the bread. Like you eat everything. You just don't waste anything. Then I married my husband, who is from America. And similar to what you were sharing about this individual you worked with, his dad worked nights, his mom worked all day. And so they kind of met in town, had dinner out every night. And then dad would go to work, mom would bring the kids home and would continue. And you're right. Like that's just kind of the norm. That was the way that they were raised. Doesn't mean one is right. Doesn't mean one is wrong. But whenever we got married, we used to eat all the leftovers like in my house, right? Everything you make, there's a purpose. We didn't eat out much. I'm one of 5 kids. We just couldn't. It was a treat. Well, my husband, that was not the case. And in fact,
It was every day.
it was every day. That's just what they did. So season 3 of the podcast, we were talking about learning to fight. And every week, my husband and I would talk about cooking. That is one of the number one things that we fought about for a long time until we figured out, as you said, you got to get to the root of that. And cooking wasn't the issue. The issue for us was I grew up eating just whatever because you were grateful because you had something. And he grew up, eating out because that's what they did. And so coming to an understanding, to communication. And as you said, that's what it boils down to, even a parent, that, hey, this is what we do, but here's why we do it this way. And the teaching behind that too. So that way you're not setting your kid up for a failure, not, just so they're aware that they may not be able to do the same.
Yeah. I it's so interesting because as I said, like I come from a really poor background where, I had 2 part-time jobs when I was in high school. I was a hustler and my parents, they couldn't buy anything. I had to buy myself shampoo. I had to buy myself bus tickets, whatever. But that was just how things were. So now, like, if I buy something for my kids, I try to always tell them, I'm like, guys, this is not normal. Like, just so you know, like, yeah, there are people that struggle that cannot afford this. I also try very hard not to make them feel guilty about it because we don't choose what family we're born into. So I think it's really important not to make them feel guilty that they actually have and that we're able to afford things for them. But it's more about like being grateful and thankful for what they have and counting their blessings, because that's all I want them to know. Like, I don't want them to forget how, blessed they are to have what they have. And because there are people that have a lot less.
Yeah, I think a big lesson that we're constantly teaching, and it's something that we talk about quite often, is that gratitude versus entitlement. There's so many kids that are just given and given because. And as long, and it's okay, like you said, it's okay to give. You want your kids to have nice things. You don't want them to go without. But as long as you are always bringing that awareness to the situation. And, for example, you're arguing or you're negotiating your rates, not because you can't afford to make the payment. And even if you can't, that's okay. Like, but why would you not want to keep money in your pocket? It's your hard earned money, and these corporations, every time I would call and try to cancel my DirecTV, they would always lower my bill. Happened year after year, So I'm like, oh,
yeah, that's really, I like to call it mindful spending. I think it's important to be mindful spenders. So there are times when I will purposefully choose to maybe spend more money than I should. Like, I'll give you an example. Just recently now before Christmas, I ended up going to a grocery store close by, and in front of the grocery store, they have these beautiful Christmas arrangements for the potted plants for the outside. And the area where I live in, again, I'm very grateful because I used to live in shelters. I live in a very nice area, super nice neighborhood. And so I was like, oh, do I make these planters I'm like, I don't have time. I'll just buy them. And I went to this place and I'm like, oh, they have these beautiful planters. I'm just going to buy one. I went to check the price tag for one. It was $250.
Oh gosh.
I need 4 of them. That's $1,000. I'm just like, okay, this is a vacation, small vacation, not a small vacation, but like a night out of town or something. Like this is in my head. I can't stop thinking about the opportunity cost. So I said, no, I will go to like a different part of town where I'm sure I can find like things for a lot cheaper. Anyways, I ended up getting 4 of them for like $150 at a
Wow.
different place. But the point of the story is that a few years ago, there was actually a mom from our neighborhood. She was starting her own business. She was doing these planters and this was her business. And I remember like I could have gotten them cheaper somewhere else, but
Mm,
I purposefully chose to spend money with her. Like now she wasn't
yeah.
charging $250 per one, but it was like, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes we have to be mindful. Like, are we supporting a
Hmm.
business? Are we supporting a person? If it's these big corporations, no, I don't want to give them my
That's
money
good.
because, I'm sure that they can lower my cell phone bill. They're already making lots of money. And
Yeah.
so I am just trying to pick and choose who
Yeah.
and how I'm spending my money.
That's really good. That in itself is a fantastic way to live every day, because if you're supporting someone, I love that. If you just look all around us, you do have somebody. And you can go back to the coffee story, you know. I'm super intentional. Now, it is convenient cuz Starbucks is everywhere here in the US, but at the same time it's like if I can, I will drive out of my way to get it the days that we do get treats, from a
Yes.
more purposeful. Anyways, that's beside the point. Okay, Maya. I'm going to close with this one question, and you can talk about your book a little bit more here if you want. You can talk a little bit more about the Wealthy Kids Investment Club or more about your Instagram, whatever you want to tie into here. But what recommendation would you make to a parent who wants to build wealth for their kids, in addition to everything you just shared already, but really through investments, but isn't sure where or how to start?
Yes, so that's a fantastic question because I find that a lot of parents are, in that boat and they want
Hmm.
to do something for their kids. One thing that first of all, like there's a lot of misconception out there about investing. A lot of times people think it's similar as gambling. It's not. There are ways to invest safely, especially for long term. One of the products that I absolutely love are ETFs and index funds. They have very low fees and provide a high degree of diversification already.
Mm.
And to actually learn more about those, like you can even go to my Instagram. It's called at teach.kids.money. I have a blue check mark. So make sure you
Hmm.
follow the right account, not the
Yeah,
scammers
and
who
you've
will
got
try.
for sure over 100,000 followers. It's a really large account.
Yeah, yeah. So just like make sure you don't follow the scammers because they will try to sell you crypto and pretend to be me. So that's not
Oh,
me.
okay.
But on the account, there's actually like a freebie in the link on the
Hmm.
profile, and it talks about what ETFs are and index funds, and it's just super easy way to actually understand that. And if after that you want more information, just about basics of investing, you can definitely get this book. It's not just a book for kids. It's intentionally made to look very easy to understand. So it's
Hmm.
called From Piggy Banks to Stocks, The Ultimate Guide for a Young Investor. And then the Wealthy Kids Investment Club is really an investment club for families. So we have a lot of parents with younger children that are going through the lessons on their own time. So all the lessons are on demand when you have time. And they're going through them and implementing some of these steps because the sooner we start investing for ourselves and our kids, the better it is because we're taking advantage of the long time horizon and the compound interest. Because that long time horizon will allow our money to grow and actually turn into a nice sizable amount. But if we wait, the time is passing us by and
Hmm.
it's an opportunity cost, right? Because that money could have been earning us money.
Yeah, one of my favorite graphics, or some that you share throughout, your strategy, is the one that shows from 0 to 18 and how much money could have been made. And then if you invest the same amount of money at this certain age or whatever, it's just like, oh my goodness gracious. You know, time is so important when it comes to investment.
Yeah, and I think like one thing that people don't realize too is that even if we start investing something like $10 a week for a
Mhm.
brand new, like a newborn child, and we continue investing that until their age of 18, me in the meantime, like they get a part-time job, and then you teach them to continue investing as well. I mean, every child could be a millionaire. It's
Yeah.
really simple, and I'm not making this up. It's simple math based on facts. Again, if you want the facts, you can go to my Instagram page.
Mhm.
But I really think we could all be millionaires. All of our kids could be millionaires. And there is a way to do it. It's just that we were not taught, and
Mm-hmm.
it seems far fetched. It seems like somebody's telling you something that's not true. But I think part of it is also discipline, which is kind of
Yeah.
like what we started this
Right.
conversation with, and now we're ending with it, is that discipline of continuously contributing that $10
Yeah.
every week and staying on top of it and not taking that money out, letting that money sit in there
Mm-hmm.
and grow. And then, just, letting the
Yeah.
compound interest do its magic.
One of the words that's been ringing in my head the whole podcast, and I haven't said it yet, is habits. Everything boils down to habits. It really does. Whether it's your bedtime, whether it's you putting in that $10 a week, whether it's you getting your coffee out or making your pot of coffee at the house, all of those things are habits. And we have a choice. What choice are you going to make? Are you going to say yes? Or are you going to say no? And again, we go back to the fact that our kids are watching. So, what
Yeah.
habits are we teaching our kids through our
Yeah.
own actions?
Yeah, they say that 95% of what we do out of habit. So
Mm.
we do a lot of things throughout the day on autopilot. So if we can, and this has been my big thing with teaching kids about money. If we can teach them some of these good habits now,
Yeah.
we hope that when they become adults, they can do these habits or actions on autopilot without thinking. It's like
Mhm.
the money comes in, let's say from their paycheck, they put aside a certain amount towards saving, which is
Yeah.
invested later on, and then the rest of the money can pay the bills and be used for spending. But we really want to implement these good habits up front, and
Yeah.
normalize them.
Yeah, that's really good. Maya, thank you so much for chatting with us today. I am going to add your information about all of the things you shared about as far as your book and your Instagram page, and also the community that you have at Wealthy Kids Investment Club, all on our website at drkellycagle.com, where you can find the show notes for today's episode. So, Maya, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate
Thank you
you.
so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to chat with you and with your listeners about this.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, lifelong learners, I hope you feel more equipped to bring learning to everyday moments. We will see you guys next week.